began as an intern, I believe, with the Patriots, and then he went over with some of the crew that moved from the Patriots over to the Chiefs and started working with Ryan Poles. And now he's carved out a great career as an analyst. And you know him, you love him. He's one of the nicest guys in all of media. And he's at the Senior Bowl right now. Field Yates joining us. You find an offensive lineman or two or three for us?
I'll tell you what, guys, first of all, it's so great to be on with you, and thank you for the great intro. You guys were getting there, and apologies for the traffic in the background. I'm almost settled. I don't know my way around Mobile well, so I thought I'd be back in time a little sooner than I actually am. You guys didn't quite get there, but pretty much what you were trying to say was that, the two teams that I've worked for, the Patriots and the Chiefs, I'm sort of the common thread that ties all their success together. So I am available to the other 30 NFL teams if they want to have generational runs like the Patriots and the Chiefs have had for the last 30 years. I kid, of course. But, yeah, there actually is some good offensive line talent down here, guys. This year is the second, but the first full year, because the announcement was late last year, that juniors or guys that have not graduated or will not be graduating this spring can take part in the Senior Bowl. So it's opened up a whole new cross-section of draft prospects. So we're seeing guys who are true juniors down here this week, and the result is that I do believe that this roster might be about as talented as we've ever seen, at least during my time coming down to the Senior Bowl. The quarterbacks will always be the big question mark, and even in a not great quarterback class, there's like a ton of talent on the board down here.
All right, so if Ian Cunningham does leave, if he does end up going to Jacksonville, would you take the assistant general manager's job with Ryan Poles?
Well, you guys don't need my help because you've had this incredible multi-decade run on Chicago radio, but I do feel like if the Bears are riding at the very top of the NFL, it would only prolong your careers even further. Now that, hey, Tom, have you paid all your daughter's weddings yet, or are we just through college graduation?
No, I'm halfway.
Okay.
I'm halfway through the weddings, and I've got a year and a half left of the final tuition, so I still got a long way to go.
Okay, so we want to keep this run going, and I feel like, if that's what it takes, me becoming the Bears assistant GM, I'll happily do so to keep make sure all the Waddle children are accounted for. The Silvys are a little younger, obviously, so we got to get through, grammar school and prep school and all that before we can worry about weddings and things of that nature. But, yeah, I'll be curious. I haven't heard a lot about that Jaguars GM job other than, Ian, I think, will be on the radar. No surprise, he's been on the radar for a lot of these GM openings. I'm sure you guys have spent some time with him, and he's a very, very sharp and experienced guy. I don't know if that's where we'll end up, but if he does end up in Jacksonville, Ryan Poles, you have my number. I'm available.
Awesome. I would love that. Hey, Field, you mentioned there is some offensive line talent down there. Can you give us some insight on as to who the Bears may be looking at as an offensive line coach, and maybe a suggestion or two as to someone who would fit that role nicely?
Yeah, I really haven't heard. I think we're all kind of focusing on the possibility of Hank Fraley, obviously leaving Detroit and coming to Chicago, which I always viewed as a long shot. Hank, not just he's very loyal, obviously, to Dan, having coached for him. It's a great offensive line in Detroit. There's a special bond between the offensive line and successful coaches in general. So I thought it would have taken a pretty unique experience, whether that was becoming an offensive coordinator or a play caller. That might have been the way that you get Hank Fraley out of Detroit, but it wasn't a surprise to me that he ended up sticking around there. So for the Bears, I don't have a specific name, guys. I've been trying to sort of dig through the who has Ben worked with previously, which has been one of the themes of the staff. Not exclusively guys that Ben Johnson has worked with, but of course, like many head coaches, he has tapped into familiar faces and names to him. So, I don't know. I mean, it's going to sound very reductive here, but just got to get the right guy in there. And I think this past season was probably a wake-up call to the front office about how much they got to continue to invest in the offensive line. I'll be the first to tell you that I thought on paper it looked better than it ended up performing last season. I know you guys have talked about this plenty. I think there is some responsibility of the quarterback as well to reduce the number of sacks taken and reduce the number of times in which they're putting themselves in disadvantages before the snap. Those are all things that as you become more seasoned and you can kind of play the game out before the ball has actually been snapped, I think will continue to work more and more in Caleb's favor. But pick 10. I know we got a long ways to go until we actually get to the draft. I'm not saying it's a guarantee, but I'd certainly bet my money on the Bears going offensive line based off who I think will be available and who I think will likely be taken off the board by the time we get to number 10 overall.
Before we drill down in a possible free agent name or something like that, Field, we're talking to Field Yates, Waddle and Silvy on ESPN 1000. I always love on a random night when I get a text and I look down at the phone and it says Field Yates. And you texted me right after Ben Johnson was hired, the savior has arrived. And I know, and I know, like
I thought you said Field's text was you up.
Yeah, first you up, then the savior has arrived.
Okay,
maybe he was talking about himself, but in all seriousness, I know you were having some fun. But why do you believe Ben Johnson is legit and can be great?
Yeah, so we all know the perils of getting too far in over our skis on a head coach who has never done it before. And then maybe I'm doing the same thing that I have done in the past. What I do think, though, about Ben is that this job, more than any other of the available jobs this offseason, and there were 7 in total, required somebody who was clearly an A-plus play caller and a talent maximizer at the quarterback position. And what does that actually mean? Well, I think, the obvious parts are like, to identify a quarterback's strengths well and highlight and maximize those strengths. That, to me, is kind of the essence of coaching. I also think there is a relatability that is so essential. And I think part of what will make Ben relatable to Caleb is not that Jared Goff is the same kind of player at all as Caleb Williams. But Caleb is going to say, you know what I freaking love watching on Sundays? The Lions offense. I want to play in a system like that where we're putting up 500 yards and 35 points per game. He comes with the credibility that Caleb and the entire offense is going to instantly respect. I just think it's different than other play callers who could have had that Chicago Bears job. And I think the fact that his staff includes at least one former head coach, and Dennis Allen, I think is an advantage as well. I'm going to sound a little bit like a cliche, but DA can be a sounding board. More important than being a sounding board for Ben is, well, as a head coach, you always want to have your hands, your fingerprints all over the entirety of the roster. Ben Johnson's an offensive guy. I don't care if Ben Johnson has, I'm sure he'll want to be involved some, but Dennis Allen will take care of the defense. And Ben doesn't have to worry so much about that, right? He will when called upon, but we got to get his offense right. The defense is not the problem in Chicago. The offense just needs to be completely reformed. And, maybe I'm just too much of an optimist, but I think the pieces are still in place for a high-level offense sooner rather than later. And, I think Ben's confidence in Caleb shined through during the press conference. And there's a part of me that feels like it's ridiculous that you even have to, suggest you still believe in Caleb Williams. Because we're 8 months removed or 9 months removed from walking away from the draft in Detroit, thinking that Caleb Williams had arrived to Chicago and they may have this prospect who can totally alter the landscape of their franchise. And I feel the exact same way. I think this kid has some seriously special traits, and I understand the guy who was drafted just behind him, Jaden Daniels, took his team to the NFC Championship game. Well, you know what? Not all situations are created the same. Not all players are created the same. I still believe Caleb Williams has every bit of what it takes to be an outstanding quarterback, and I think that Ben Johnson has more than what it takes to be the coach to get him there.
Field, what do you expect them to work on specifically early? Is it obviously playing on time? Is it mechanics? I assume that Ben's going to spend a ton of time with him, kind of tearing him down to build him back up. Based on what you saw from Caleb this year, where would you think they will focus?
Yeah, I know I probably sound like a broken record because you guys have talked about it, other people have talked about it, but it is. It's playing on time. And I think that on top of that, it's one of the byproducts of not playing on time. You talked about mechanics, and it's sometimes the first things you can do before you build a player up is kind of undo the knots that have been tied into this player's sort of his muscle memory, right? So it's finding ways to get rid of some of the bad habits that might come with playing fast or at times playing too slow and playing deliberately. Does your footwork get compromised? Does the torque of your upper body get compromised when you're throwing the football? But playing on time is so important. And, I've loved hearing, former quarterbacks that are now talking to the media in some way, shape, or form talk about the pre-snap puzzle versus the post-snap puzzle. And some of that's going to be won by the coach. I really believe that. There are coaches who, based off of scheme alone, can figure the puzzle out for the quarterback before the ball is even snapped. I think we see it more in college because of the disparity in talent. This draft class, and not to pivot to the 2025 draft class at quarterback, but just as a reference point, I'm studying players like Jackson Dart from Ole Miss and Will Howard from Ohio State. One of the big questions is, how does it look when the puzzle isn't solved for the player? And I think that Ben can help solve the puzzle for Caleb so much more frequently than he had it solved and figured out this past year, I should say. And Caleb has so many natural gifts that even if the puzzle isn't solved, in time he'll be able to process that mentally and play faster, and the physical tools are already there. We saw some of those in spades this season on throws that not many quarterbacks can make. So I think it's playing on time, but understanding from Caleb not just the importance of playing on time, but what the next move is if you don't hit things off on schedule, right? If you don't hit things on schedule, there was a tendency too often this year to retreat. Next thing you know, you're trying to run away from a defender, and you might already be 8 yards behind the line of scrimmage. I'm not saying you want to take sacks, but there are times where taking a sack and going to 2nd and 14 is a whole lot better than taking a sack and having it be 2nd and 21. So I just think there are so many more nuances and levels to the game with Caleb Williams that Ben Johnson will bring out the best of. I know this is probably what you hear most times when somebody gets tired, but I'm talking to people that have known Ben since going back all the way to his North Carolina days when he was playing in college as a backup quarterback. This guy has always had these savant-like offensive skills that people have felt like would one day translate to being a very, very successful NFL head coach. So I am truly thrilled, and he was the most coveted candidate on the entire coaching market, maybe alongside Mike Vrabel. But once the Patriots job became available, it seemed pretty evident that Vrabel had his eyes on that one. But as others, like Kyle Brandt and others have very eloquently laid out, like Ben Johnson could have had any of the jobs, and he chose the Bears. That alone, on principle, to me, suggests what he believes is possible with this quarterback.
Yeah. Field Yates joining us. It's Waddle and Silvy on ESPN 1000. So when you look at all the pieces that the Bears have, the things that you were talking about, they do have some nice things. So the Rome I still really like. I think DJ Moore can really still be a great wide receiver. I think Cole Kmet can be solid at tight end. But I think what you said at the beginning was you overestimated. I think Ryan and Ian overestimated what they had up front. I think they've built it from the back to the front, and they've not. You could look at the quarterback and say, yeah, he could have done that better, or the coordinator could have done that better. But again, don't you feel they have to overdo it on both lines here in this offseason?
No question about it. And I don't know if we can talk free agency now if you want to get to a name that I think sort of checks all the obvious boxes here. But yes, this is the off season of the offensive and defensive lines for the Chicago Bears. And I think there are plenty of names that will fit in the draft that can help sort of get them there. And you're right. They just, no matter how talented your quarterback is, they're very rare guys who can make a bad offensive line look great, right? And I just think that this Bears offensive line needs to be markedly better to give them a real chance to, what you're trying to do when you have these young quarterbacks, have it, is you want to get them to a point where you can credibly evaluate what the upside is. I don't think Carolina is fully there yet, but think about how different the tenor is surrounding Bryce Young at the end of this season compared to last year. Heck, compared to week 3 when he was benched for Andy Dalton, right? And if you go and look at some of the things that changed last offseason for Carolina, maybe they overspent, but they really reinforced that offensive line. And I think that gave them a much better shot to see what they had in Bryce Young. Not that the Bears, it's not like Caleb is like at risk of not being the guy in Chicago if things don't go well early, but it's how quickly can we get to where I think Caleb is eventually capable of reaching, which is, call me a sucker. Maybe I'm doing this because I'm the eternal optimist, but I think this guy has the trait to be the kind of quarterback that we're talking about playing deep into the postseason, and we're sitting here and we're talking about all the guys that are trying to get at the level of Patrick Mahomes. I think that's in the realm of possibilities for Caleb Williams.
You're not shaking. You're not shaking on that at all.
Listen, there are some things this year that didn't go as planned, but I felt like I think there is A, a rookie adjustment, B, some of that was a situation. I don't know. Again, maybe it's because I am, and this might be an advantage, it might be a disadvantage. Maybe it's because I'm spending time watching all of these teams around the NFL, and I'm seeing quarterbacks that have either been around long enough, or I'm just not sure there really is that next level. I'll give you I don't know what the end game is for Kyler Murray, but I don't think it's like at this highest level anymore. We're too far into the Kyler Murray experience for me to say, you know what, if only one or two things went differently. But I watched Caleb at times this season look like a very confident, capable, whatever you want to call it, franchise-level quarterback, right? And some of them was victory. Obviously, there was the nasty, losing streak for a while. Some of it was defeat. I remember that second half of the Detroit game, which could have easily been a game on Thanksgiving. That game could have been 50-7 by the time we blinked, and it was the fourth quarter. And so they obviously fumbled at the very end of the game in terms of the situational side of it. But I thought that game showed some absurd toughness, both physically and mentally, from Caleb Williams. That you pair that with the physical skills that I have zero doubt are there, give me a lot of hope that this player can become the player that we were talking about at this time last year. Again, I just think it's far too soon for my evaluation to feel decidedly different.
Field, give us some names of some potential free agent additions that the Bears will be looking at, you believe, on the offensive line.
Yeah, there's a name. I mean, I'm sure you guys have already mentioned it. If not, then I'll take my my moment to say, hey, you heard it here first, because it's the most obvious one that everybody is going to be talking about. It's not because I have sourced information here. I just have a brain that knows who's available and what the Bears need and who's a really good player. It's Trey Smith from the Chiefs, going to be a free agent in March. This is a guy who has been a part of many, many big games. He is tough. He's powerful. He's nasty. He's a tone setter. The guard market is exploding right now. We have seen guys like Chris Lidstrom from the great Boston College now making $21 million a year for the Atlanta Falcons. The number is going to be north of that for Trey Smith. He's going to have suitors all over the NFL, but obviously Ryan Poles has some familiarity with him, having been part of the Chiefs when they drafted him. I'm sure. Again, I'm not trying to, be the source guy that's telling you, I have this is what I have been hearing. I'm just telling you, logically, for a team that needs offensive linemen, Trey Smith will be a name that will be mentioned for everybody. And again, I know the roster hasn't been good enough. I understand there's a reason why, the Bears right now are where they are. They need to be a better wins and losses team when the games matter on Sunday.
It's great.
They have a very, very clean situation as far as the cap is concerned. They've managed the books really well, that if they want to go spend and they find a player who's amenable to playing ball, they have the resources to go out there and legitimately impact the offensive line this offseason.
It's great stuff. Field, we appreciate it. We'll catch up more closer to the Combine. Enjoy the Senior Bowl and enjoy the Super Bowl, okay?
Thanks, Field.
You guys are the best. We'll talk soon. All righty.
Assistant General Manager Field Yates. Sound good?
That's a nice ring to it, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
Hey, we got a year and a half of college left. That's no problem. We'll pay it off with my EGM role.
See you, Field.